welcome to the final talk before the keynote and jam and everything. Really nice to see you guys still here, going strong. We're gonna talk about making music for games, and we're gonna listen a whole lot today. I thought it'd be nice with some listening at this time of the day. As it says, I promised you guys 25 tools and techniques to make a game soundtrack. Then I started actually working with it, and I came up with 28. And then I started rehearsing it, and obviously we don't have time for 28. And I bumped it down to 21, and then there'll be 7 more that you'll have to look at yourself. So if you're interested in this stuff, I will provide a PDF for you at your convenience. But today we'll go through the 21 tools that we have time for. But before we do that, I actually want to see how many in here are composers or have any, experience with making music. All right, damn, that's a lot. What about sound designers? Okay, cool. And there's obviously also someone who has no experience with music or sound design. It's going to be totally cool as well. We have 21 things, and if you're a sound designer or composer, you might know some of them, you might know none of them, and you can just take away whatever inspires you from this talk. So don't worry. And just to give you a little bit of background, I have a bachelor's degree in sound design from Sonic College. It's right here. Bam. I thought this map needed Sonic College. And now I'm working at Flashbulb Games. And there it is in Copenhagen, where we are right now, roughly. Here's a little bit of some examples of projects I've worked on these past years. I've worked a lot with the people from the animation workshop, which is really fun, really talented bunch. But today it will be all about Trailmakers and our most recent update to Trailmakers, which is called Trailmakers Pioneers. It's a game about building cool vehicles and going out to explore and gather resources. And in Pioneers, you also fight the evil Botnak Corporation. It's a fun one if you're a Dane. Occasionally, when you have the time, you're also just chilling with the native froggets. So that was the challenge ahead of me coming into Trailmakers and having to make music for all this. So let's just hear a little bit, and I'm gonna play the examples like this. I know it's really ugly, but that way it works because it's offline. So here's a little bit of music, and this particular music is sort of for the exploration part of the game. So that's an example of some exploration music. Now let's try some of the Botnak style music, so evil robot things. And we'll try a little bit of some frogget-styled music. So that's roughly what we're dealing with in Trailmakers, and now we're going to go into how all of these things came about. So the first thing I do whenever I'm making a soundtrack for a game is start off with a mood board or several mood boards. It's a really good starting point to get inspired and to get to know the game. And this is a point where you want to talk to your art people This particular mood board is something I got from my art director. Then I made this one myself. I also like to make them, and you might recognize a few games. And that was all just things that to me was good inspiration for the general vibe of Trailmakers. Might also want to use mood boards for specific biomes. So the first piece of music you heard was from the meadows. So I got this mood board from my art director. Here's another one for a place called the Mudflats. And with these ones, one of the advantages is that you can actually start working before the game is done or even halfway done, because you start to align your ideas with the art team and the game director's ideas. So it's a really good place to start. And the way I work with it is I actually, if I have the means to do it, it's really nice to print it out and have it hanging on a wall, or you just have it present on a secondary monitor while you are composing. During this process, another good thing to do is to come up with keywords like this. So for Trailmakers, space is a thing. So I got some associations. There's some Star Wars-y kind of space, but there's also maybe some more synth, more modern style space stuff. There's a lot of tech, industrial synth effects, mechanical things, different kinds of tech. There's some indigenous elements, you might call it, some things that originates from, I guess you could call it, native cultures of the people or creatures you meet in Trailmakers. And there's a general sense of adventure that was very specific to this update. We wanted to induce Trailmakers with this feeling of adventure. When doing this, it's important to obviously gather these things, think about this for yourself, but you really want to align yourself with the game director, the game designers, everyone else basically on the team. So if you're doing a thing like this, make sure to show it to everyone else and sort of get a thumbs up, because then you know that you're on the right path. When you're so far, you can start thinking about the function of the music. So what do you actually want to do with this particular music? So the examples I played was like music that enhances the immersion in an environment, or music that represents these quirky frogget characters, music that represents a combat scenario where you're fighting evil robots. And you sort of got to nail down these things, so you're not just making, it's really hard to just make a piece of music for Trailmakers, but it's a lot easier to make a piece of music for a frogget, because then you know exactly the characters of this particular moment. And I'm keeping the examples here, because then what you're going to do, and which is not, actually it might sound obvious to start with what's important, but I've failed to do this 100 times. For example, if I'm making a combat scenario right down there, a lot of pace, a lot of action. In the past, I might actually start with coming up with a chord progression, but then I realized, in this particular instance, that the defining feature of a good combat track to me actually has to do with the rhythm and the pacing. Because if you're doing combat music, it's all about the gameplay, and you sort of want to represent that pace and that intensity. And a good way to do it is to work with rhythm. So in this case, I might actually start by just getting a sense of the tempo. I might start by putting down some drums, and I'm not even worrying about the chords or the melody or anything at that point. The opposite is true for an exploration track. With an exploration track, I probably want to start with the instrumentation to sort of find instruments that has a vibe that fits this environment. So for this, I went with lush strings and flutes and like really ambient, swathy synths. And I didn't worry about the tempo or the rhythm at all. I actually tried to sort of, I didn't work with the tempo, because the tempo would just put me into a box that I didn't need it for this particular piece of music. With the Froggets, I started out with a melody, because I wanted to make the frogget settlements sort of memorable. It's the place you go to when you're relaxing and when you're sort of taking time away from your quest of fighting evil robots. So I wanted that to be a nice, memorable little moment. So I started out with some melodies that I could associate with these froggets. Here's another place where it's like, okay, I want to represent this place. So I might want to bring in some different, more distorted instruments to fit this sort of decay. The robots have destroyed this place, so I might take some of that was here and destroy it in my instrumentation, basically. All right. So, and in doing this, one of the things that you can do is to use leitmotifs, which is like, I guess it's a German word, and that's because it's really old, this technique, way back to Wagner and opera and stuff, and then all the film composers started doing it, and the idea is basically that you have a melody or a rhythm even, it could be anything, but you use this musical thing to symbolize a particular character or place, and you use this thing over and over again, so you come to associate the music with this specific thing. And I try to put these things into these boxes. So, for example, we have the different kinds of settlement tracks. We have some villages in the sky as well that are also frogget settlements. And we have all the nice fields in between. So all of these, the music that I did for all these things, they share some similarities. And in this case, they share similarities in melody, which is the classical way of using a leitmotif. So let's just try and have a listen to that. So that's a little piece of melody used in the settlements. This is how it sounds at daytime. And now we're going to listen to how it sounds at nighttime. So that was basically the same melody being used, but I changed up the instrumentation and pulled out a few elements to make it more relaxed. So in that way we can have the same place being represented in slightly different ways, but still keeping the same vibe. So this particular melody is used again in the other settlements, and here it's a little bit different, but you'll be able to hear the same melody. So there we had the same piece of melody, but even slower and with some different harmonics underneath even. But that just, again, to sort of connect these different settlements. For this particular thing that I called the shimmering fields, sort of all the nice sunny fields in between, we have a little bit of a different motif. So just try to listen to this melody. So a different melody here that I'm repeating it several times in the same piece of music to sort of keep the same vibes going, just evolving it very slowly. And now it gets advanced, because now we're going into this part, which is some of the settlements in the sky. And And I wanted to connect the settlements in the sky with sort of all the areas that are beneath, because the sort of the lore of the sky trees is that they sort of grew and lifted the entire earth just like up into the sky. So I wanted to connect these places in the music. So this particular piece has the melody we just listened to and the melody from the other settlements. Let's see if we're able to hear it. So there's the one from the settlements earlier. And now a fast version of the other one. The last one is a little bit harder to recognize because the melody is much faster in this version, but it is actually the same notes that was used in the Shimmering Fields very ambient track. So it can be really fun to take a melody from a very ambient exploration music and put that melody into the context of a more like rhythmic settlement kind of music. So leitmotifs, the idea of reusing the same things to enforce a particular bond between things. I also did it for the Botnak things, but that has not as much with melody, because there's not a lot of melody in the evil robot themes. There's more like this sense of tech, synth, destruction, destroyed, distorted things. So that's sort of what ties together all the Botnak things. You might ask how I come up with all of these things, and the really complicated and really simple answer is a lot of intuition and listening. So that's basically the loop of composing music for a lot of people, and this is not just me. I think it's a common misconception that you have to know a lot about musical theory, and all the game composers I've talked to sort of enforce that this is the core of the craft, is to try out something basically, use your intuition and then listen back. If it sounds horrible, just do something else and listen back again, and that's basically the loop of making music. And when you've done this for 10 years, your intuition and your listening skills are just that good that for some it just magically sounds nice, which is sort of I know that's a horrible explanation, but the idea is that your intuition will just come with experience, and you don't need to know any musical theory to do this. We all have ears, and we have all listened to music a whole lot, whether we liked it or not. So we can all do this, actually. And of course, if you're getting stuck with this, you might pop out of your listening mode and into theory mode and try to apply some musical theory on the things that you're doing. But the important thing is to go back into the listening mode and actually figure out if it's doing the thing that you wanted it to do. So that's the one thing that ties all the different workflows together for me, is the ability to actually listen back and analyze how am I feeling right now hearing this. Pleasure. And then there's something in between, I guess, which I just thought of as experience. And obviously that just comes with doing it a whole lot. But you sort of, the point is that out of your intuition, you will, if you do that a lot, you will get experience. You might sort of start to recognize some things, some patterns, which is then becomes your own like theory of music, I guess. And that just comes naturally. So I know I have some theories that if I do this, it will sound like this. But that's based on intuition a whole lot and experience. It's not necessarily based on going to lectures about music or looking it up on the internet. So I think my point is that there's many ways to get to making music, but listening is the one thing that ties it all together. Oh yeah, there was also an arrow there, because you might do things just out of experience without even theory or intuition, I know that if I do this, it's going to sound like this, just because I've done it 1,000 times. Yeah. So now we're just going to go through a lot of fun things you can do with music. And one of them is obviously recording a live instrument. And it's not a thing I do a whole lot. And a lot of game composers will sort of just get locked in their computer. And they're probably sitting, you know, they might be sitting in an office with other people, do that as a sound designer a whole lot. So you get really stuck within just your computer. But to get out of the computer, it's really nice sometimes. Here's me just trying to record. I know I said recording a live instrument. In this particular case, I'm recording 2 instruments that you can't play at the same time. At least I'm playing it, I'm not recording it. But it's a horrible thing to do, but it works. Oh, now it's very, yeah, that's not very loud. Yeah, it doesn't really matter if you can hear it that much. The idea is that this was just a way for me to come up with something that I wouldn't have come up with if I had just stuck to, you know, making music within my computer. Let's hear what that little thing actually sounds like in a final track. I think my point with this is that you don't have to be particularly good at playing a melodica, for example, or a guitar. It just adds something when you're recording a live instrument. And another thing you can do if you're really bad at playing basically anything, you can use a bow, like for a violin bow, on a guitar. And you don't have, you know, that's just doing this. And then you put it into your DAW or whatever, and you start working with it, and you might be able to use it for something. So I did this for, these are 3 different places where it's used a whole lot. It's this place called the Withered Heights, where the environment has died. It's the wasteland, and it's the Botnak sort of desolation where things have died as well. It's a lot of places where things are dead and there's nothing. And the point being that it sounds horrible when you're bowing a guitar. And that is exactly what I needed for these particular places. So let's listen to this. Here's some bowed electric guitar. And it's not the mic feeding, it's actually that horrible, like really high noise. So that's really effective to create this really eerie feeling. I also tried bowing an acoustic guitar and using this for the wasteland. The bowed guitar in the background. Very Last of Us vibes. So that's an idea to sort of play instruments in unconventional ways, and also it's really good to play instruments even if you don't know what you're doing, because you might end up with something like this. Another fun thing that you can do is to try to connect your music very literally to the thing that you're trying to represent. So in this case, I was trying to make some music for these frogget people. So I thought I might actually try to make the music sound like a frog. Again, it sounds like an obvious thing to do, but often I wouldn't do this at all. I would just make some music that I felt was fitting. But in this case, I just browsed through this synthesizer a whole lot until I found something that remotely resembled a frog. And then I maybe tweaked it a little bit. And then I ended up with this sound. I hope you weren't like sleeping out there, because then you had a horrible waking up. So that's a froggy sound. So yeah, I used it in this particular track. There it is. Imagine these weird froggets chilling to this, because it sounds like weird froggets singing weird things. Yeah, another way to use this literal connection between the music and the thing is for this place that I talked about called the Withered Heights, with all the bowed guitars and things. So what I wanted to do when I got the concept arts for this place was to represent the sort of the motion of this biome dying, like all the trees standing up and then just withering and dying, falling down slowly. So I tried to do this with pitch. So basically almost everything that I put into this track was like pitched down over the course of the track, like playing a sound and pitching it down to sort of give this feeling of falling. You can do this in many ways, but almost all synthesizers, I guess, have some sort of ways to control how much you pitch things. In this case, there was a bend range, so I could set that to 2, and then I know that the range of my pitch is 2. So if I just draw like a line down there, it's going to pitch it down 1 semitone, and that's really effective. You might also pitch things just if you have the sound rendered out. You can get sort of, in this case, a pitch envelope, so you can see that slide, like it's really not a lot, but that's enough, all it takes to give us that really eerie feeling of something falling down. Yeah, let's try to hear it. Here's just one of the small things that I used that were pitched down. So it's actually some bells that were used in the Meadows soundtrack. And then I took those and just did this. So you get this very eerie feeling that something is not right. And this, it's like the bell basically just died there. So I used this in this track. There's the bowed guitar again. I also tried pitching down the bowed guitar, and that made this really like horrible sound of, just because the bowed guitar has so much density, so if you're pitching it down, you can really feel that sort of motion. So that was another thing. And what this also gave me, this sort of exercise, is that I thought about this thing of pitching things beyond the equal tempered scale. So the equal tempered scale is just the way we have chosen in this particular time and place to divide sound into musical notes. So we have these 12 notes that you can see on a piano, and then they repeat forever. almost, and that's sort of just how we chose to divide music or understand it. But going beyond those notes, everything that's in between is really interesting. In particular, in this case that we just listened to, because it creates that eerie feeling that something is not right. You can get this sort of complexity from recording live instruments in a bad way, I guess, because then all kinds of weird things spring forth. I also found like woodblock sounds or like things that I would maybe use for sound design that doesn't have a musical quality to it, but putting it into a piece of music can really help to sort of give some more complexity to the textures in your music. You can also deliberately detune things, like if you have several oscillators that making up a synth, you might tune these slightly different. You might tune delays, so you can add a delay to a thing, and then you can choose to just have that delay being tuned a little bit differently than the thing it was actually applied to. And you can bend all sorts of things that you're not supposed to bend, like bells and flutes and things. It's really fun. The next thing, number 10, is arpeggiators and sequencers. So what this is a tool that helps you repeat notes, basically. So by just holding down have some keys on the keyboard, the arpeggiator can repeat notes for you, and that is extremely useful. I use this a whole lot in the soundtrack, so let's just listen to some examples. So here you see it, the arpeggiator. So it has some settings in there to see how much you repeat tones. You can see the notes down there. And it's just an electric piano, basically. But the action of repeating the notes like this make it sound like something else and gives it a really gamey feel. I use this on other things as well. I guess this is sort of recognized as a really gamey synth. Things like this has been used in underwater themes. I sort of would suppose that's a good way to get that is just by having an arpeggiator that repeats notes really fucking fast. And then you get it's actually sort of counterintuitive that repeating notes really fast makes it feel super relaxing. But that's because it's so fast that it just becomes one blurry motion. A sequencer is almost the same as an arpeggiator. It will repeat notes for you, but it will repeat, if you just hold down one key, it will repeat the notes in a different melodic pattern actually. So here's a sequencer in a synth that I used to create sort of like a combat styled sequence. So you can see up there how the notes are repeated, and they actually have different lower notes, higher notes, so you can repeat them in a melodic pattern. And the good thing is that you can get to really easily get quite complex things. Like I would never be able to play any of these things on a piano, but in that way you can get to places really fast. That is quite cool. Another thing that you actually heard in this example is using touch automation or modulation, or it's basically a way to have, if you have an effect, distortion, ring modulation, filter, you can even use it on something like dynamics, which is basically just volume. But the idea is that you can create a more varied experience by automating these things throughout time. So here's an example of me automating like some ring modulation on a layer. So yeah, there you have the ring modulation. So you can hear the frequency changing. There you can see it. And there's what it sounds like without all these weird effects. So it turns out it was just a drum beat. but I managed to get it to this point where I could use it as like just some sort of weird robotic thing. And it would sound really boring if I didn't change these frequencies over time. And touch automation means that I can, if I activate touch automation in my DAW, it will just record whatever I do. If I'm changing this frequency, it will just record it, and you can see it's putting it on the actual track, so I can see when the frequency will go up or down, and I can even manage it in there as well. All right, let's try another fun thing. Guitar Rig is an example of a guitar amp simulation. So it's basically a plugin that lets you simulate that you have a guitar amplifier. The funny thing is that you can put everything into it. Because it's inside your computer, it just takes anything. It doesn't have to be a guitar. So I put all kinds of things through this guitar effect thing. Flutes, strings, hang drums, pianos, synths. Yeah, a lot of stuff have been run through this guitar effect. And that actually sort of created a lot of the I guess the sound of a lot of these tracks come from things being run through guitar amps. Another fun effect is something called pulse stretch. It was actually originally called Pulse Extreme Sound Stretch. But I think maybe that's just a little bit cringe, so they just changed it to pulse stretch. I'm just gonna find it here, because we can do that in Audacity. I never ever use Audacity except when I'm pulse stretching stuff. So let's just do that. The idea is that you can stretch sounds to make them longer, and thus they will be more sort of blurry, more ambient. So here's the track. So we're going to listen to how this track sounds before pulse stretching, and then what it might sound like after it has been stretched. Okay, now it's not coming out of... yeah, that's obviously because it's not going there. Okay, there we go. So that's the loading music, basically. Just an example now. So if you want to stretch this, just select it, find the effect in here, pulse stretch. And then you can, basically you can choose how much you want to stretch it. If I have one, it's going to be the same length. If I have two, it's going to be double the length, and so forth. Let's try and stretch it with a factor of 3. And I have no clue how this actually works, and you don't need to know. It's just an algorithm that someone named Paul created. And I guess that's the favorite thing for me working as a composer, is I don't have to know how anything works. I can just use all these fun tools that someone else created. So now we're going to listen back to this thing now that it has been stretched. So what you can imagine with this is that it's really good to create like ambient layers. So I wouldn't normally just stretch an entire piece of music. I would probably stretch an element and have different layers underneath. But now we're at a game jam. If you're making a game that needs some ambient music, maybe it's because we're on a very limited time budget here. It might be a good idea to just make a 1-minute piece of music and just stretch it. That way you might get a really cool, very long piece of music for your game, if that's what you want. So that was just a little thing that might be good to... I guess you could also use it just for ambient design. It doesn't have to be used for music. All right, that was an example of some pulse stretching. Now we're going to get into sort of more the production techniques kind of things. And we don't have a whole lot of time, so I think I'm going to go through some of these a little quickly, and then we might have time for questions as well. Frequency balance is just an awesome thing to be aware of when you're working as a sound designer or as a composer or anything like that. the idea is that all sound exists on this spectrum from like very low sounds to very high sounds. You could clearly see that this is not like some composer style thing. This is basically for beat makers, I guess. Kick, snare, and hats. Not that relevant for me, but something like this might be a little more relevant. This sort of someone has attempted to characterize what happens if you have too much or too little of certain frequencies. We're not going to go through it, but just to being aware that there's some overall frequency balance that your listener might sort of experience is a really nice thing. And one of the things I found for me personally with frequency balance is that I have had a tendency to have tracks that sort of, actually I had a lot of tracks that felt sort of distant and dull and lifeless, and I realized that even before the track is done, or maybe normally you would change the sort of tweak these things in the very last part of the process with like mastering, but what you can do is to actually make a little bit of premature mastering, just lifting the lid, I'd call it, from the music. If your music feels dull and distant and doesn't have that clarity, just actually having an equalizer on your master and just pull up the highs a little bit. You can also see with this one I'm controlling the low end. This means that it will sort of bob down. So if there's too much of the low end frequencies, it will just take them down a notch. Things like this is really helpful, and it's okay to do it sort of early in the process, even though traditionally mastering would happen in the end. But it just makes it much more enjoyable for me personally, that it sounds good before I send it off to mastering. All right, we already looked at this, but what I didn't tell you is that the weird frogget music is actually in Trailmakers. It's coming from that boom box that's standing there, and that is called diegetic music, and that basically means that the music actually exists within the game or the film or whatever it is. And it's just a really fun thing to try to incorporate music into the actual world. It's not just you as a player that listens to the music, the characters in the world also listens to the music. And that gives the music a different meaning. And in this case, it's not a thing that game designers or artists might think of. So in this case, it was me suggesting that we should have a boombox playing in this particular spot. And then luckily everyone else thought it was a fun idea as well. So that's a thing that you might experience with. It's really fun to do. This one is maybe not as fun, silence, but it's really effective, and it is basically necessary for a lot of games to, as a composer, be aware of when there's music and when there's not. So you can see that silence is sort of, I think of it as an important thing both in each individual piece of music, but also across the entire game. I think we're not going to listen to the silence, but we are going to just look at how the waveforms in some of these tracks are. So basically, you can see that there's more intensity in some places, and then all of them have this sort of motion that something goes up and then it goes quiet for a while. And what it does, it is sort of this pause for effect, just letting the music sink in and not being sort of impatient with your music. I think listeners really appreciate it. It's a common technique, I guess. It's like a rhetoric device. If you've ever seen like a really good speaker speaking, they will most likely be making some this like pause for effect. Might look something like this. And that's it. That was a pause that Obama made. My point is that this pause made no sense right now, because you didn't hear what was before the pause and you didn't hear what was after the pause. So the pause was just useless. But pauses are really nice to sort of enhance whatever comes before and after. because it will give players, listeners, some time to digest what's going on. This is how I sort of worked with silence across the entire game in an implementation sort of situation. This is in Wise. It's quite a complicated software if you haven't seen it before, but you can basically see there's a few things that are just labeled silence, and they have out here the loop count to the far right has this little orange dot, which means that it's randomized. So the idea is basically that you're going in to play these meadows, day, different variations, and then you're gonna jump to silence. And that's how all of the exploration music works, is that we give the players time to just be in the world without music. So the music will sort of feel more important when it comes back. So it allows for more varied gameplay experience, basically. So now we're getting into Wise slowly. We will just touch upon some of these things that you could do when you're integrating the music into the game. But one of the things that's really important is to define how one piece of music transitions to another, and also when it transitions to another. For this, we would basically make some kind of state system. You can see that I have areas and boss, if we're in boss battle, if we're in a settlement, if we're in combat, we basically have a lot of states that we use to determine which type of music is playing. Pretty basic concept, but it often gets really messy. And here's down there all the different combination of states that will result in specific kinds of music. And we also have that thing which you can see in the top is sort of the rules then. Because one thing is when something will transition to another piece of music, but also how it's going to happen. So in this case, a transition rule might look like when you're going from any kind of music to the Mudflats Explorer music, you're going to do that immediately. You're going to use a fade out that you can configure in there, and you're going to jump to a custom queue, which I have set up, and that means that inside the Mudflats music, there are some cues, and it's just going to jump to a random one, so the music will fade in from a new place, basically every time you hear it. So you're not going to hear the music starting from the start. If you're making an ambient piece of music, it's quite easy to just fade in the music in random places, and that will create much more variation for the player. Another transition rule might look like that up there. That's the hack transition rule. Is that I'm telling Wise to go to the next custom queue, but I know that there is not a custom queue. There is no custom queue in the next piece of music, which means that it will never transition, which is why I wrote for myself that transition is not happening, because this is an insanely hacky way to make it transition rules. My point is that you can do a lot with this system, and I just recently figured this out, that I could actually make a transition not happening by just syncing it to something that didn't exist. And Wise will post an error, but it's not dangerous. That's another fun thing in Wise, that some things are labeled as errors, and some things are labeled as warnings. You can actually tweak that as well. So of course, be careful, but don't restrict yourself. It's fun to experiment with doing these kind of things. All right, we have a few things left, and then a little bit of time for questions. So when you're transitioning, obviously making seamless transitions is sort of a staple of game composing. I think I used to make a lot of seamless loops where when I exported it, I was sure that it was going to loop seamlessly, even when I was working within my DAW. But actually just adjusting these start and exit cues in Wise and having sort of a tail on your loop is oftentimes enough to give this sense, if you compose something that loops nicely, just make sure that you export like the tail of the loop, so it's not cutting, but it lets it actually play, it finish sort of the loop while it's starting over. So there are a lot of ways to do this. To make sort of nice transitions happening and integrate this into a game in a meaningful way and have a lot of randomization, I used this thing that I came up with, which is the 3-2-1 rule, which is basically if, let's say you have a combat scenario in Trailmakers. You don't know how long the player will be in the combat state. You don't know when the player is going to be in the combat state. So basically what will happen is the player might encounter an enemy, might kill the enemy within 10 seconds, and that's it. And the player might do this many times. So to prevent the player from hearing the same combat music over and over again, like they would just hear the start of the combat music every time they did this. So the 3-2-1 rule basically means that the first part of the track has 3 variations, the next part has 2, and the final part of the track only needs 1 variation, because players will very rarely get to that point. If the final part of the track is 2 minutes in, they probably have killed off the whatever they're fighting before they get to that point. And I realized this when I watched a talk, a tutorial by a guy who, he's called Peter Murray. He composed some music for Hogwarts Legacy, and he had made this really elaborate system where everything was randomized and you could have like 10 minutes of combat music playing, and then, you know, the player will never hear it because they'll never be in combat for 10 minutes. And he actually figured this out like later on that, okay, this type of combat would never go on for that long. So we had made a lot of useless randomization basically. So to prevent yourself from doing that, make sure that you randomize the start of the track more than the latter part if you're integrating it in this way. Let's give an example. So this is some combat. And you have the yellow arrow showing what you're playing, and you can see there's 5 different variations there. And then it jumped to the next one. It had 3 variations, and the last one has 2. So I bumped the 3-2-1 rule up to 5-3-2 in this case. And so on and so on. The last and final point of today, and the last way to do randomness, is instead of doing horizontal randomness, which this previous thing was an example of sections of tracks that just play horizontally and they are randomized. You could also randomize within each section. Then it would look like this. So we have 4 different variations of these add-ons that I'm adding onto a track, and I'm just cycling through them. So it's all the small, in this case, melodica and harmonica things. They sound a little different every time because I just made like a bass version of the track, and then I had different variations for melodica and harmonica that you just might put on top. So that's another way to do randomness. Now it's 5 o'clock and there is a keynote in 15 minutes. I feel like you should be free to go there, but you should also be free to ask me questions because we do have a tiny amount of time. So let's put this slide up and say thank you, and go to questions if there's any.